Emily Reynolds has always loved mornings in the small town of Blackwood, Indiana. It was a quiet, almost sleepy place in which time seemed to flow in a special way, slowly, gently, like along the smooth flow of a river in windless weather. Old maple trees along the main street stood proudly above neat lawns, and small shops and shops seemed to know all the visitors by sight. Here people greeted each other, stopped to exchange a few words, or ask about family affairs. This intimate atmosphere had its own warmth, and it was this warmth that Emily liked so much. She was born here, in Blackwood, in a house on the outskirts, among the same maples and oaks, near the lake, which was considered a favorite walking place for the entire town. Her parents were teachers. Her mother taught elementary school, and her father taught geography in high school. Perhaps that is why Emily herself chose the path of a teacher. It seemed to her the most natural, almost written in her blood. Since childhood, she loved to read aloud, act out skits, and help the younger ones explain things that were difficult for them. She not only learned the value of education, but also believed that teaching is not just a profession, but a calling to educate the future generation. By the age of 28, Emily had seen a little more than the typical Blackwood resident, having gone to the nearby big city for college and then lived in Seattle for a couple of years. But in the end, she still returned home, where she settled in a small, cozy house with her husband, Jake Reynolds. Jake was a year older, a man of pleasant appearance, with a kind look and a calm character. He worked at the local police station. One could say that they lived just like a textbook. A quiet American outback, a good job, a family, a small but cozy house, a neat backyard. All this creates an almost ideal picture of a measured life. However, Emily had another side to her life that the locals had no idea about. She loved to party. No, she did not frequent such outings. Her heart was entirely devoted to family comfort and school. But once a year, or a couple of times a year, she allowed herself to truly relax. This usually happened in the company of her best friend, Kate. They met Kate in college while taking general education courses. Kate studied to be a designer, was energetic, bright, and loved to dance. It was Kate who always invited Emily to big cities, to New York, to Los Angeles, to Chicago, to those places where the nightlife was booming, where people thirsted for drive and loud music flocked. But in recent years, the lives of each of them have changed. Kate moved to Chicago, got a job in a famous design bureau, and Emily remained in her hometown. And yet their friendship did not cool. They kept in touch by phone, on social networks, and planned meetings. And then the moment came when Kate invited Emily to her birthday, which promised a loud party in the heart of Chicago. The morning that started it all was one of those days when the autumn colors were just beginning to touch the leaves. Emily woke up before the alarm. Unable to sit still, she was looking forward to the trip. She carefully began to pack her things, her favorite blue off-the-shoulder dress, a little more daring shoes than usual, and a couple of casual outfits. Although she didn't plan to stay long, she wanted to look appropriate for the occasion, and Kate knew how to set the tone for parties. Jake, waking up a little later, watched with a smile as his wife zipped up a small suitcase. "Are you sure you want these shoes?" he asked, pretending it was a strategically important question. "It seems you have another one, more convenient." "These are beautiful." Emily winked at her husband, held her shoes up to the light, and turned them around to show off the neat ankle strap. "I don't go out to parties that often, so at least today I'll feel special." Jake touched her hand lightly and said, "You're already special, honey. Put them in your suitcase. Kate will be glad to see you, I'm sure." "Yes, and it's good for you to change the environment." He was not jealous of city life and fun. He knew that Emily loved her work and home comfort, but sometimes she, as a creative person, needed to breathe the air of a big city. Jake himself remained in Blackwood. He had a shift, and leaving the station without an officer when the population, although small, but sometimes incidents happened there, was not an option. After breakfast, the traditional eggs and bacon, fresh pancakes drizzled with maple syrup, and coffee, Emily got into the car. The old but reliable Ford, which she inherited from her father, creaked the door, but started up the first time. She kissed her husband goodbye, promising to be careful and to be back in time for Sunday dinner. "Say hi to Kate," Jake shouted after him as the car slowly pulled out of the yard. The road to Chicago took about 3 hours. Outside the windows, fields and small villages flashed by, and sometimes trucks and vans appeared, heading from the south. Emily put on her favorite selection of music, a mix of jazz and modern pop that always put her in a good mood. About an hour later, she stopped at a gas station, bought a bottle of water, and said hello to the friendly gas station attendant. He asked in surprise where she was going at such an early hour on the weekend, and Emily smiled and said that she was going to see a friend. Ordinary little things on the road, but they were the ones that created a calm, almost homely feeling of security. The closer she got to Chicago, the more the landscape changed. The silhouette of skyscrapers appeared on the horizon. The movement became more and more lively. Emily felt a little nervous. Although she had been to large cities, she was not in the habit of going here every week. The traffic, the highways, the multi-level interchanges, it all made her a little dizzy, but she was glad that she had planned to leave early to avoid the horrendous traffic jams. Having reached the desired area, she found a parking lot near Kate's house and called her friend. "Kate, I'm there." "Hello. Dear, it's great that you made it so early." There was sincere glee in her friend's voice. "Get up, I just finished preparing lunch. True, this is not hot cuisine, but I promise it will be delicious." Emily went up to a small but cozy apartment on the second floor of an old building, which had been restored to suit modern needs. In the corridor, she was greeted by large paintings of abstract art, most likely the work of the designers themselves who were doing the renovation. Outside the door, Kate was already waiting for Emily, dressed in a wide t-shirt and jeans. Barefoot, she felt here like a fish in water. And of course, the first thing the girls did was hug, happily noting that they had not seen each other in person for almost a year. Kate was the complete opposite of Emily, loud, lively, with a loud laugh and a love for all new trends. But it was precisely this contrast that once brought them closer. Kate gave Emily a feeling of freshness and energy, and Emily, in turn, helped her friend calm down and look at things more practically when needed. "Well, how is life in Blackwood?" Kate asked as they sat down in the kitchen at a small wooden table with cups of coffee and plates of pasta. "Quiet, measured," Emily answered, smiling. "Sometimes I think that perhaps it's worth going to you in Chicago for a week to feel the rhythm of the big city. But there's so much to do. Lessons, assignments, and even in the evenings I have to check my students' work. And the house has enough worries." Jake, however, suggested that I rest, but you know how it happens. "Yeah," Kate sighed. "I myself sometimes miss quiet towns. I'm tired of this noise. But on the other hand, here I feel drive and inspiration. In the evening, you will understand what I mean when you come to the club." They talked for a long time about how things were going with Emily and Jake, what was happening with Kate at work. She talked about new projects, exhibitions, and plans to open her own design office in a couple of years. There were drawings and prototypes of her ideas hanging on the wall. Emily looked at it all with admiration. Kate was incredibly talented. When the clock showed almost 2 days, Emily decided it was time to rest after the journey. Kate gave her a guest room. It was a small bedroom with a sofa, filled with boxes of sketches, old CDs, and some colorful fabrics. Emily lay down on the sofa, closed her eyes, and half asleep her thoughts frantically moved either to Jake, who was probably now sitting in the station with a bunch of papers, then to her students, who sometimes asked her incredible questions, then to the upcoming party, which promised loud music, bright lights, and, of course, dancing. The very thought of dancing, joining the crowd, feeling the pulse of the nightlife made her heart beat a little faster. She allowed herself a short nap to regain her strength. Waking up around 5 in the evening, she took a shower and began to get ready. Kate hovered nearby, leafing through the wardrobe, telling Emily which jewelry was best to choose. In the end, they settled on a simple gold bracelet that matched her earrings and, of course, matched the blue dress. Emily put on her favorite heels, straightened her hair, giving it a slight wave, and looking at herself in the mirror, felt that she was ready. "Wow," Kate whistled. "Miss Reynolds, you look amazing. You're no worse, Emily laughed, looking at Kate's scarlet dress, which emphasized her figure. Well, are you ready to conquer this city? Kate nodded. The evening promised to be fun. They called a taxi so as not to think about parking and the opportunity to drink a glass or two of cocktails. Chicago was beautiful in the evening. The lights of skyscrapers, neon advertising, noise, and busy streets. The car, weaving among other cars, brought them to the area where popular clubs were located. Here, crowds of people flocked to various establishments. From some, they heard heavy electronic music, from others, Latin American rhythms, in others, classic rock. Kate chose a club called High Beat, and as soon as the girls walked in, they were hit by a wave of loud beats mixed with the buzz of voices, shouts of fun, and dim strobe lights. Several of Kate's mutual friends, mostly fellow designers, were already waiting for them. Everyone was brightly dressed, laughing energetically, anticipating the night's adventures. Seeing Emily, they greeted her cordially, scattering compliments and friendly hugs. Soon the waiter brought a tray of shots, and everyone, naturally, made the first toast in honor of the birthday girl. For Kate, one of the friends shouted, raising a tiny glass of bright liquid. May this year bring you inspiration and cool projects. After lightly discussing each other's creative plans, the company moved closer to the dance floor. The music either accelerated or slowed down, as if the DJ was playing with the emotions of the audience. Emily didn't consider herself the queen of the dance floor, but today she decided to forget about her complexes. The last time she had fun like this, for real, she didn't remember when. Under Kate's skillful guidance and the gentle influence of the cocktails, Emily felt a long-held sense of freedom awaken within her. She danced, laughed, hugged Kate, and every now and then talked to new people. She was introduced to a variety of people from art and design circles. Some worked on a new restaurant project, some created logos for a well-known company, some worked on interiors for luxury homes. Emily was amazed at how creative the spirit was around them in every little detail. At some point, she decided to pause and step aside to catch her breath. I ordered a soda with ice because I was sweating from dancing and felt it was time to freshen up. At that time, Kate was discussing something with a tall guy in fashionable glasses who was waving his arms every now and then, clearly talking about some bold design ideas. Emily smiled, remembering how calm and predictable evenings were in Blackwood. A single bar, a couple of tables, familiar customers, some country music. And what a difference it makes with the crazy polyphony of Chicago. Hey, are you okay? Asked the girl standing next to her, also sipping her cocktail through a straw. You look like it's your first time at a party like this. No, everything is fine, Emily answered. I just haven't rested like this for a long time. Great, I'm Sally, Kate's friend. The girl smiled. You must be Emily, whom she constantly talks about. Yes, that's right, Emily smiled in response. How do you like it here? Fabulous. Maybe then we'll move to another room. There's a calmer atmosphere. They say there's a lounge area. You can chat there. With pleasure. They exchanged contact information and danced together a little more. The music did not stop, but only gained momentum, and Emily felt that it was time to wash and freshen up a little before continuing the fun. She winked at Kate, saying, I'm here now, I'm not going anywhere, and headed to the restroom, taking with her her purse and a bottle of water. The hallway leading to the restrooms was relatively quiet, although a couple of people stood there, hugging each other or negotiating who would order a taxi. The light in the hallway was a soft yellow, and compared to the strobe lights on the dance floor, it seemed almost cozy. Emily entered the women's restroom and saw her reflection in the mirror. Her cheeks were slightly flushed from dancing, her eyes burned with a feverish sparkle of excitement. She smiled to herself, remembered the quiet Blackwood, almost the opposite of this world. She ran her hand under a stream of cold water and splashed it on her face. The water was pleasantly refreshing, and Emily took a short breath, trying to catch her breath. The loud music from the hall seemed to be partially buzzing even through the walls. She liked this feeling of pulsation somewhere in the distance. Taking another look at her reflection, she straightened a lock of hair, slightly moved her shoulders to shake off the tension, and walked back into the corridor. But as soon as she took a few steps towards the dance floor, her legs suddenly felt some kind of unnatural weakness. It was as if everything around began to sway slightly, and the music, previously clear, now sounded dull, as if through a pillow. Emily thought for a moment that perhaps she had eaten too little, had too much alcohol, or was simply tired from dancing. She wanted to go back to Kate or Sally to ask them to look after her, give her a minute to sit, but as she took a step, she suddenly felt even more dizzy. Did I really get drunk so quickly? Flashed through my consciousness. But usually she knew her norm well. Of course, adrenaline and noise and excitement could play a role, but now it was stranger than usual. Moreover, she managed to drink water to freshen up. Maybe the stress of the last few days has taken its toll. She tensed, deciding that she needed to quickly get to the table where she had left some of her things and where her friends could be. But suddenly, she felt someone lightly touch her elbow. Turning around, she saw a man whose face seemed vaguely familiar. Perhaps he was from the company that revolved around Kate. But before she had time to say or ask anything, the weakness in her body intensified, and a light, rippling fog began to appear before her eyes. "Hey, are you okay?" A man's voice came through the hum of club music. He said it quickly, with a hint of concern or interest, but Emily could not understand it. She nodded automatically, instinctively taking a step back, and at that moment he grabbed her hand quite possibly, trying to help and keep her from falling, because she apparently looked very unstable. But the noise in my head began to grow, my ears were ringing, and my legs were giving way. All she had time to feel was a sudden chill of fear, which did not fit into the general atmosphere of the holiday, and then everything around her went dark. The last thing she clearly remembered was someone's strong hand squeezing her forearm, and a vague silhouette looming over her as she lost consciousness. The club continued to rumble with music. People laughed, danced, wandered in the dim corridors, not even suspecting that something strange was happening just a few steps away from them. But Emily could no longer call for help or go out into the world on her own. It was as if a sleepy fog instantly enveloped her mind, and she plunged into a semi-conscious state from which she could not get out. Emily woke up in a state of complete confusion. Memories were confused, consciousness either sank into a viscous darkness or resurfaced, but with every attempt to stay in reality, she felt that she could not put herself back together. A feeling of horror and detachment permeated her entire being, as if she had suddenly found herself inside someone else's life. The last thing that flashed in her memory was the chaotic flashes of the dance floor and a strange hand grabbing her wrist. And now there is some kind of faceless, cold place around. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids were heavy, as if someone had attached lead weights to them. Through half-closed eyelashes, she noticed the darkness and weak light pouring from behind the curtained window. The room was cramped, with dull grayish-beige wallpaper. The smell of dust filled my nose, mixed with the persistent aroma of cheap air freshener, which only aggravated the stagnant aroma of old furniture and carpet. The walls seemed faded and featureless. Somewhere water was dripping from a poorly tightened faucet in the bathroom, a monotonous, viscous sound, like the second hand on a broken watch. Emily tried to turn her head. There was a throbbing pain radiating from my temples. The burning sensation in my throat reminded me of nausea. Naked, trembling with chills, she grabbed her fingers into the wrinkled, not the first freshness sheet, trying to cover her body. The cold penetrated deeper than the skin, as if creeping up to the very bones. However, this was not what scared her most. The fact itself was terrible. Where is she, and why ended up here? Soon, separate, as if torn, pictures emerged in my head. Loud music in the club, a soft sofa in the lounge area, vague silhouettes of strangers nearby. Then a hand, perhaps a man's, squeezed her forearm tightly. The twilight of the corridor and the pungent smell of alcohol mixed with electronic music thundering in the distance. Everything else was covered in a thick fog. She couldn't understand how much time had passed since she ran out of the club's bathroom, feeling faint. With a shaking hand, Emily tried to lean on the mattress to raise herself up. All the furniture, from what I could see, consisted of a shabby chair in the corner, a rickety table with a reading lamp, and a nightstand next to the bed, on which lay a small packet of her sleeping pills. The pack was empty. This instantly struck her with alarm. She always carried a drug for insomnia with her, but almost never took it in large doses, a maximum of 1 tablet when the night threatened to turn into sleepless experiences. Now the package was completely empty. Have I swallowed everything? A panicked thought exploded in her mind. Her throat was dry, and she began to shake even more. My stomach twisted painfully. How this could happen remained a mystery. It was impossible to wrap my head around the fact that she voluntarily accepted the whole pack. Or did someone force her? The pictures in my head were too vague. Memories came up and disappeared in fits and starts. She pulled back the sheet, trying to find her clothes. Her shoes were lying on the floor, a sock was nearby, and her dress was carelessly crumpled and thrown on a chair. She did not find any traces of the purse. A real panic began. After all, there were documents, a phone, and a wallet in the purse. Telephone, Emily thought feverishly, wanting to immediately call her husband or girlfriend. But there was no phone. Her heart sank with fear. She impulsively pulled the dress off the chair, trying to pull it on her exhausted body. My hands were shaking, my head was spinning. I wanted to scream, but my throat was raw, and my voice seemed dead, as if it had been taken away along with all the memories of the past night. Having dressed somehow, Emily took a few steps towards the door, leaning on the wall so as not to fall. It seemed that she was about to lose consciousness. Everything swam before her eyes. The edge of the room where the refrigerator was seemed like a tunnel stretching into the distance. But she managed to get to the front door, move the latch, and open it. The cool morning air hit my nose. She saw several cars on the narrow motel driveway leading to the parking lot. A lone figure of a man at the far end of the courtyard was smoking, leaning against the wall. It appeared to be one of the motel workers, perhaps a night custodian or janitor, who was late on his shift. Emily made a timid attempt to call for help, but her throat did not want to make sounds. She realized that she would not last long like this. Weakness and fear constrained her body. Blood was pounding in her temples. Every second spent in this incomprehensible place seemed like an eternity to her. In desperation, she looked for the phone and noticed a landline device on the table at the entrance, but, judging by the thick layer of dust and old wiring, it was treated without much respect. With effort, she picked up the phone and pressed it to her ear. At first, there was only a crackling sound, but then short beeps were heard. Emily's heart skipped a beat with joy. The connection, although probably mediocre, was still there. 911, she muttered, dialing the emergency number familiar to every American. Trying to speak clearly, as taught in safety lessons, Emily squeezed out, "I'm in a motel. I feel very bad. I don't know how I'm here. I don't remember." The dispatcher on the other end of the line, professionally detecting the panic in her voice, hastened to ask clarifying questions. Her name, where she is, what her symptoms are. But Emily was confused about the address, not sure if the name Lone Star Motel was the right name for this place. My head was pounding and my tongue was slurring. She still tried to make out some sign or brochure. Finally, I found a paper napkin with something like Clark Motel, 77th Road, written on the side in pencil. Emily did not know the exact coordinates and begged the dispatcher to find her, describing external signs. Small roadside gas station at the entrance, 2 hours from Chicago. Surely there are thousands of such motels along the highways, but the dispatcher promised that an ambulance team would leave immediately. After hanging up the phone, Emily felt her strength, leaving her even stronger. Wild melancholy and despair rose inside. They arose simultaneously with pain in the abdomen, which was looking for a way out, perhaps as a consequence of an overdose of sleeping pills. The threads of memories continued to flash randomly: Chicago, noise, dancing, smiles. Somewhere nearby in these fragments of images, Kate's face slipped through, beaming and excited. And then failure, darkness, silence. Emily felt for the switch on the wall and, turning on the light, turned to the mirror hanging above the low cabinet. From there, a pale, haggard face looked at her, circles under the eyes, tangled hair. She saw fear in her own eyes, as if she was not the owner of her body, but a random passer-by spying on someone else's misfortune. With difficulty, she made her way to the bed and sat down on the edge. My thoughts were racing. Call Jake. Warn Kate that something happened to me. To me. God, if only I didn't take the whole bottle of sleeping pills. But she couldn't find a cell phone, and a landline would not give her the opportunity to call any other number than 911. At least, that's what it seemed to her. She was in such a state that it was impossible to understand the structure of this phone. Time seemed to slow down. She felt every minute of waiting for an ambulance doubly. The state of uncertainty and panic began to turn into semi-consciousness. The body was shackled by weakness. The eyelids were filled with heaviness again. When the sound of a siren sounded in the parking lot, Emily seemed unsure whether it was a dream or reality. Jake Reynolds spent the whole weekend in that anxious anticipation. Despite being tired from his shift at the local Blackwood police station, he couldn't sleep a wink. His plans were to meet Emily in the evening and have dinner together, discuss her trip to Chicago for Kate's birthday. However, time passed, and her call, or at least SMS, did not arrive. The night grew darker, the clock on the wall ticked monotonously, and each movement of the hand sounded to him like a resounding blow to the heart. She and Emily had a calm, reliable agreement. If she suddenly decided to stay overnight with a friend for a couple more days, she would definitely inform her about it in advance. However, this time there were no messages from her. Emily's phone seemed to simply cease to exist online. She didn't pick up the phone or respond to instant messengers. By 2 o'clock in the morning, Jake had already dialed her number several times in a row and heard the same short answering machine signal, informing him that the subscriber was unavailable. Anxiety grew inside him, which he tried in every possible way to cope with. He went through the army. He understood that in difficult situations one should not give in to panic. One must analyze and act. But when the person you love more than life itself disappears, logic and self-control become relative. At some point, he said to himself, "Stop guessing, I'll call Kate." Emily's friend's phone number, listed in his contacts, usually answered quickly, but now the call would ring and then go to voicemail. Only on the fifth or sixth time did Kate turn on, and then it was clear from her voice that she was having trouble thinking because she was tired or drunk. "Hello?" Her voice sounded muffled, mixed with hangover hoarseness. "Kate, this is Jake. Sorry it's so late. Do you know where Emily is?" He spoke as calmly as possible, but there was a nervous strain in his voice. "Emily, it seems that Kate has finally woken up completely. Damn. I don't know, Jake. We were in a club, dancing. Around 3 in the morning, I realized that she was not around. At first, I decided that she had gone out for a cocktail or to the restroom. But I started looking for her in the hall. I couldn't find her. I thought maybe she felt bad and decided to leave. I was sure that she would come to spend the night with me." Kate paused, and in the ensuing silence, you could clearly hear her breath catching. She was probably beginning to panic at the thought that her friend had not made herself known. "Kate," Jake tried to keep his voice firm, "when was the last time you saw her?" "At about 2:30 in the morning, we were still joking together, drinking a cocktail. And then, I remember exactly, she said that she was going to go to the restroom to freshen up. I lost track of time, but noticed her absence around 3, well, maybe a little later. I went around the whole club, asked our mutual friends. No one saw her. One guy from our group said that he seemed to see someone leading Emily somewhere towards the exit, but did not see his face. I honestly thought that she decided to come to me, maybe through a different entrance or went out into the fresh air." Kate's voice trembled, breaking into tears. "Jake, I don't know what to do." Jake clenched his fist. The feeling of anxiety became critical. Emily is not one to disappear without warning, and if she felt bad, she would call and ask for help. "Okay," he said in an even tone, trying to introduce an element of control familiar to him from his military service. "First of all, calm down. Try to remember all the details that may be important. Did you stay in that club until the end of the party?" "Yes. There was music playing there until 4, Then we were asked to leave the premises. Until the last moment, I hoped that Emily would return or be found. Then I checked to see if she had forgotten her purse. No, she had not. I went home, thinking maybe she was there. But she was not there. I texted her, but no response. Kate sobbed nervously. "I'm sorry I didn't call you right away. I thought suddenly she went home." "Okay, don't apologize. Oh, I'm already on my way to Chicago. We need to check everything on site. As soon as any news appears, let me know immediately." He hung up in cold anger and soul-tearing anxiety. Without wasting a minute, Jake quickly got ready for the trip. He didn't want to wake up Emily's closest friends or parents and didn't want to scare anyone until there was clarity. But he already understood for himself. The situation was serious. The wife disappeared in an unfamiliar crowd of a big city, and no one saw where she went. Considering that the phone was not answered, and she herself did not appear either at Kate's or in their shared home, there was almost no hope for a simple explanation. An hour and a half later, he was already crossing the borders of Chicago. It was early morning. The sky was slowly beginning to turn gray. The streets were relatively deserted. Memory helpfully gave him his army training. Upon arrival in an unfamiliar place, he first studied the area and developed a search strategy. He knew not to fall into emotional panic. This is often detrimental to the result. But every time the name Emily popped into his mind, his heart skipped a beat and his hands clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He repeated to himself, "First I will collect information, then I will act." Arriving at Kate's house, he found his friend Emily completely sleepless, with her eyes red from tears. Her apartment was in disarray: open purses, papers on the table, suitcases with sketches. Kate, apparently in a panic, tried to find at least some clue: a note, a forgotten phone, anything. When Jake crossed the threshold, she, without holding back her emotions, rushed to him. "It's my fault," she whispered, fighting back tears. "I should have not lost sight of her. I never thought that something like this could happen at the club." "Calm down," Jake said authoritatively but gently. "Your only fault is that you wanted to have fun on your birthday. Emily is an adult. She decided to come herself, and we didn't lock her at home. Let's better find where she went." Kate led him into the living room, spreading the big picture before him. She listed the names of everyone who was at the party, who saw Emily at what moment, who left earlier, who left later. Jake wrote down all the information he received in a small notebook, inserting clarifying questions, as during an interrogation. He understood that every detail could be important. It was a methodical approach, one that his military experience had taught him, putting little things together to build the overall puzzle. So, he concluded when he had collected all the possible evidence, at about 2:30 in the morning, Emily left the dance area towards the restroom. "Did anyone else besides you see where she went?" One of our mutual acquaintances, Michael, said that he allegedly saw Emily walking towards the bar, but he noticed this from afar. Then he got distracted by a conversation with another girl. There is no more clear evidence. Fine. Next, what kind of clothes did she wear and what could attract attention? Blue dress, high-heeled shoes. Nothing provocative, essentially. But she's a beautiful woman. They could have approached her to meet her. Kate took a deep breath. Or, damn, we have a lot of dubious types in the club. "Did you talk to the guards when you were looking for her?" "Yes, I told the guard that I had lost my friend. He said that he saw a similar girl who seemed to be staggering, walking with someone towards the exit. But many people drink in the club. No one attached any importance to this." Bitter regret sounded in Kate's voice. Jake bit his lip, imagining the picture of how Emily might have become a victim of some kind of nasty thing mixed into the drink. Everything inside him sank with anger. There is an opinion that in big cities almost every day similar cases occur when young women in clubs are mixed with prohibited substances or strong sedatives. Remembering Emily, her kindness, openness, lack of evil suspicions towards others, he felt blind rage. He promised himself that he would find those who did this and make them answer. "I'll contact the police," Jake said decisively. "Although formally I am from another state, I am a police officer, and also a former military man, I will explain the situation. Without a missing person report, they will play for time, but let's at least try to talk with them and inspect the club. Plus, I myself will go there and talk with the employees. It is necessary to study the recordings from the cameras if they are there. And so they did. Morning gave way to afternoon, and Jake didn't waste a minute. First, they went to the nearest police station. The officer at the front desk, seeing Jake's military identification and also learning that he worked for the Blackwood police, listened carefully. However, the formal procedure required filing a missing person report. In large cities, it is usually necessary for at least 24 hours of absence to pass before a search case is opened. But Jake knew every minute counts. He insisted that the desk sergeant contact the desk detective. Luckily for him, Detective Hawkins turned out to be a sympathetic person, probably influenced by the understanding that the officer's wife might be in danger. While the paperwork was being completed, Jake and Kate were trying to reconstruct Emily's last steps from memory and the map, where she parked, what route she took to the club, whether the establishment had security cameras. The parking lot itself was equipped with a pair of cameras, but where their lenses were directed remained to be seen. The club building, as usual, had several entrances, one of which was specifically for employees and the delivery of goods. Perhaps it was there that they could have filmed something. Completing the application took longer than expected. Jake felt his impatience growing, but as a police officer himself, he understood the bureaucratic obstacles. Finally, Detective Hawkins said, "Okay, let's go to the club together. Let's try to get camera footage. Although we cannot launch a full-scale operation right now, we will try to advance so as not to waste time." So they did. They had to travel in 2 cars. Kate stayed in the police sedan with Hawkins and his partner, and Jake drove his own, trying to stay close. On the way, he did not let the image of Emily out of his head. He hadn't eaten since the morning, but he didn't even feel hungry, only acute anxiety and adrenaline. Sometimes he wanted to stop and call Emily's parents, but he understood that if he informed them about the loss now, their panic would make the process even more difficult. However, it would also be dishonest to delay for a long time and hide the fact of disappearance. When they got to the club, it turned out that it was already closed to visitors. There was a general cleaning going on. Hawkins showed his ID to administrators, and they were led into a security room where video from cameras is usually viewed on monitors. The guy doing technical support yawned and stretched, but quickly sat down at the computer and inserted the hard drive with the night recording. "Let's take a look," he said. "We have 4 main cameras inside and 2 outside. I hope something useful will be found." Having rewinded the film between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, they began to peer into the grainy black and white image, a crowd of dancing people, spotlights flashing, faces barely visible due to the flickering light. A camera at the bar showed patrons approaching, ordering drinks, and some arguing or laughing loudly. Suddenly, a figure very similar to Emily comes into view. A blue dress, long hair, slightly raised on the top of her head. Nearby are 2 men in dark shirts. One of them holds a glass in his hand, and he can be seen quietly pouring something into it, covering himself with his palm. In the light of the camera, the gesture clearly catches the eye, although in a club setting it might go unnoticed. After this, the man hands the glass to Emily, who, apparently, drinks without suspecting anything. "Here," Kate whispered, turning pale at the scene. I don't know these people. God. They clearly put something on her." Jake's heart sank as if in a vice. Here it was proof that someone had purposefully slipped something into his wife's drink. His fists clenched involuntarily. "Calm down," Detective Hawkins stopped him. "This is important evidence. We'll take this recording. Let's look further." They continued to watch. A few minutes later, the screen shows Emily, swaying slightly, moving away from the bar and heading deeper into the hall. The same 2 men follow her. The quality of the recording left much to be desired, but it was clear that one of them was grabbing her by the elbow. The second was looking around, as if checking if anyone was watching. They then take her out of the dance floor area. On another camera installed in the corridor near the toilets and emergency exit, we were able to see a continuation. Emily is clearly not herself. She seems to be feeling unwell. The men support her as if they care, but from their wary looks, it is clear that their concern is insincere. Moments flash through the penumbra of the corridor. Emily is trying to pull away the hand of one of them, perhaps resisting, but it is clear that she does not have enough strength. After a couple of seconds, all three disappear from the camera's field of view, leaving, apparently, to the service stairs or to the parking lot on the other side. Damn. Jake ran his hand over his face, and Kate exhaled nervously. On the recording, everything looked clear. It looked like Emily had been kidnapped. The problem was that on external cameras, this section of the parking lot was blocked by the wall of a neighboring building. One of the cameras was not turned on that night. On the second camera, only two shadowy figures were visible almost silently leading a third one, but everything was in the distance, and the license plate of the car where they apparently put Emily was impossible to recognize. "That's all we have," said the guy from the security department with a hint of regret. Hawkins pressed the pause button, and the room fell silent. Kate covered her face with her hands, and Jake, with a frantic heartbeat, digested what he saw. He couldn't shake his rage. His wife had been dragged straight from the club, surrounded by dozens of people. No one even paid attention. No one intervened. "I'll check what types these are," the detective said, taking the disc out of the player. "The faces are vague, but maybe we'll find something. Cameras on the street or in other establishments recorded their car. We will also try to interview witnesses, security, bar staff. If anyone has seen them, then perhaps they will remember some special signs. But frankly speaking, such cases sometimes turn out to be quite difficult. Thieves can use fake cars, other people's license plates." "I'll join the search," Jake said firmly, "and I'll tell you everything I know. Let's go through the neighboring establishments, talk to everyone who might be standing outside." He remembered his intelligence and military counterintelligence skills. Once upon a time, his unit was engaged in the search for missing soldiers and officers, using the whole range of methods, from banal questioning of residents to complex schemes for collecting evidence. Now, however, everything was complicated by the fact that they were in a populous city, and even time was lost after all. Almost a whole night had passed since the abduction, and it was already Sunday afternoon. Emily disappeared for at least 6 to 8 hours. In the worst case, the criminals could take her out of town, in any direction. Jake felt the blood rush to his temples. He had been taught not to give in to emotions, but now this was a test. He remembered cases where a quick response saved people, but he also remembered situations where every second counts. He forced himself to breathe more evenly. "I can't lose my head, because it is self-control that allows you to think clearly," he repeated his internal mantra since his army days. "Okay," Detective Hawkins concluded. "I'll give a copy of the recording to the Central Department. We'll put it in the guide. You, Jake, since you know the police, go to the neighboring blocks, talk to the patrolmen so that they are on the alert. If a similar description of a woman comes up somewhere, they will let us know." Jake nodded and looked at Kate. The girl was in a state of shock, clearly blaming herself for not following her friend. Jake understood that now she needed to pull herself together, because any additional pair of eyes and hands could help the search. "Kate, try to remember if any men came up to you, asked you to dance, or talked to Emily. Every little thing is important." "I don't remember." Her voice sounded dull. "There were a lot of people, and someone came up and asked something. Maybe someone was trying to start a conversation. Everything got confusing for me." He briefly put his hand on her shoulder, trying to reassure her not to be angry with her friend, who did not foresee trouble. "Okay, you'll go over the details again later. Now we will start collecting evidence." Over the next few hours, they actually ran around the neighboring establishments, questioned the owners, and looked to see if there were any cameras filming the street. In most cases, no one was there. It was Sunday. Everything opens in the late afternoon. In a couple of bars that were open late, they said that there were cameras only inside, and they started recording in the morning, so the events of the night were not preserved. Hawkins called the officer on duty at the central station to find out if there had been any reports of suspicious cars or anyone reporting strange behavior to the company. So far, the answer has been negative. Jake felt time running out, and something inside him was ringing with powerlessness. He was not used to this. There were always comrades in the service, equipment, satellite communications, and there they were looking for those captured or missing in hot pursuit. Here he remained, in fact, a semi-volunteer who had to act in a foreign jurisdiction without access to all the bases and resources. Later in the evening, when they returned to the police station to see if there was any new information, Hawkins came out of his office to Jake and Kate with a frown. "Listen, guys, there is no news. No one has ever seen a similar car. I have requested traffic camera footage, but it will take time to process. I think tomorrow, Monday, my colleagues will begin to seriously look into this. Of course, you can continue your search on your own, but—" He didn't finish, but everything was clear. The police are not capable of launching a full-scale operation for the sake of one missing person in less than 24 hours, even if there is a recording that shows the abduction. To Jake, this state of affairs seemed absurd, but he also understood the essence of complex bureaucracy. "Damn system," he thought. "Time is running out." "I'll continue," Jake said harshly. "I'll talk to my friends, whoever I can. If we find anything, we will inform you immediately." He was tempted to call his acquaintances in the military police or in other structures, but he was aware that this could take even more time and would not give a quick result. Kate, meanwhile, sat in the corner of the site, seemingly lost in her own heavy thoughts. The wall clock was ticking on the wall, and each knock reminded Jake that Emily had not been around for 24 hours. "Listen," he said quietly to Kate when they went outside. "You better go home and rest. I don't want you to fall off your feet." "I can't," tears flashed in her eyes. "Until I find Emily, I simply won't be able to sleep peacefully." "But you're right, I'll at least eat and try to come to my senses. And I'll be on the phone. If you hear anything, report it immediately." She got into a taxi, and Jake drove the car back to Kate's house to either leave his car there or look around. His thoughts were feverish, but his military training dictated that he needed to draw up a plan for further action. "When we get back to Kate," he thought, "we'll have to call all the hospitals. Maybe she ended up in one of them. And if not in the hospital, then at the police station. Some kind of violation, detention. Although it is unlikely that she would have been identified. But it's still worth checking." At such moments, the night flies by. Chicago's streetlights turned on, and the city was once again buzzing with crowds of idle passers by filling the bars and restaurants. Jake thought bitterly about how someone's tragedy could happen nearby, while most people continued to live their lives, not paying attention. He hoped there would be witnesses willing to help. Perhaps someone saw the car in which Emily was taken away, or the two men themselves. By midnight on Sunday, she and Kate, gritting their teeth, searched all information platforms, social networks, city forums, and posted an ad, "Missing Woman, Emily Reynolds." They attached a photograph, made notes, and indicated the time and place of the loss. But there are dozens, or even hundreds, of such advertisements in a big city, and who will pay special attention to them? The situation seemed deadlocked. However, at dawn on Monday, when they were completely exhausted from insomnia and nervous tension, a message arrived on Kate's phone from one of her acquaintances at the club. "I heard that the security guards have a record kept in another office. Maybe you can see where they took Emily." It was more of a rumor than a hard fact, but it already gave a tiny ray of hope. Jake called Hawkins, and he promised to stop by that other office in the morning, perhaps referring to the backup server that is sometimes installed to conduct additional filming. So, clinging to every clue, they slowly moved towards the answer. Jake couldn't shake the sinking feeling that every minute the likelihood of finding Emily unharmed was diminishing. He imagined her voice, waking up in a mental half-sleep. He imagined her screaming for help. And then the army part of him ordered, "Don't panic, Jake. You must be cool. Find her." Meanwhile, in Blackwood, his hometown, colleagues were already wondering where Jake himself had gone, who literally took off. He did not have time for long explanations on the phone with his superiors. He only said that he was urgently looking for his wife. Several friends from the Blackwood station were willing to pitch in, but the problem was that the official authority ended outside the county lines. However, they promised that they would try through their channels to check if there had been any cases involving a similar car or strange people on the road between Blackwood and Chicago. While Jake was strategizing, his darkest thoughts were raging inside him. What if they hurt her, or is she already somewhere? He pushed away these ideas, trying to focus on the best scenarios. It happens that people are kidnapped for ransom, but they have not received any messages, no demands. Moreover, Emily did not have rich relatives or major connections for the bandits to count on a huge ransom. This means that perhaps it is a matter of some other, more base motives. After waiting until morning, Jake called several hospitals in Chicago. In the first two, he was told that Emily Reynolds did not apply to them. The third said that they had one unidentified patient brought by ambulance from the street, but it turned out to be an elderly woman. The chances that Emily would suddenly show up on her own were becoming less and less. Soon, around 9 in the morning, a call came from Detective Hawkins. "Jake, we have news from the cameras. I wish I could say they were good, but more like just more information." The policeman's voice showed fatigue. "I just saw a recording where you can see the car a little better. It appears to be a light-colored minivan, but the numbers are indistinguishable. Either the frame is blurred or the numbers are closed. Sorry, buddy, but at least the version that she was taken away in a minivan is confirmed. We have a sample brand. We will now look through the database of similar cars." Jake hit the table with his fist when he heard this. He tried to remain calm, but he couldn't get the image of two strangers forcibly taking his wife out of his head. What if she's already been taken somewhere several hundred miles away? Flashed through my thoughts. However, the presence of a clue, the brand of the minivan, already meant something. Kate, standing nearby, sighed resignedly, "You can buy this in any salon, and there are thousands of cars on the roads." But Jake did not lose hope. Sometimes even a small piece of evidence helps solve a case. By mid-afternoon Monday, they met again at the police station. Hawkins brought photographs from frozen footage of the recording. Blurred, grainy, but it was clear that the car was apparently silver in color, a Dodge Caravan or Chrysler Town and Country model 26 to 2010. In one frame, part of the bumper and headlights were visible, but the registration number could not be seen. "I've already given directions to the city and nearby highways," said the detective. "If one of the patrolmen notices a similar minivan with two men and a young woman, he will check it. But let's not be deceived. There are thousands of such cars running around the country." Jake nodded, realizing that he would have to look for other ways. A thought flashed through his mind. What if the criminals left digital traces, maybe somewhere Emily managed to make a call or send a message? But her phone was unreachable. Perhaps the kidnappers threw it away or disabled it. "Do you want me to stay here and help you work with the bases at the station?" he suggested to Hawkins. "I have some quick search skills. I can also call our IT guys from Blackwood." "Go ahead, it won't be too much help," the detective nodded. Thus began a hard day for Jake, immersed in continuous viewing of reports, databases, and all kinds of records. He could not afford the luxury of thinking rest. Every minute seemed to take Emily further and further. Kate, meanwhile, called the local media, trying to convince them to publish information about the missing young woman, citing video footage of the abduction. Some editorial offices showed interest and promised to publish the note on the website. Others responded that there were many such stories and they could not promise publication. Later that evening, when there was no new news, Jake felt like he was ready to scream in despair. But at that very moment, he remembered his army training and told himself that he had no right to give up. Even if the police cannot turn everything around at full power, he will act on his own. He had transferred from the army to civilian service not long ago, but he still remembered the techniques of how to find out information, how to try to identify people who might know something. "Tomorrow, I will personally visit all gas stations and rest areas on the highways within a 100-mile radius. I'll ask if you've seen that car. Maybe I'll catch on to at least some thread, he thought, literally falling asleep on a chair in the corridor of the precinct. He couldn't and didn't want to stop searching because somewhere out there, perhaps, Emily needed help. He sat with his hand in his pocket, where there was a photograph of them together, the two of them, happy on their wedding anniversary. On the back were written their initials and the date of painting in small letters. Jake remembered Emily's smile, her calm, soft voice, with which she often joked about the fact that he was too suspicious. Like, Jake, come on, where will any serious trouble come from in our quiet world? And now, it turns out, trouble found her exactly where she least expected it, in a bright club among fun and music. The next day, the second after Emily's disappearance, Jake finally understood. The simple logic, maybe she went to see friends, does not work. It was obvious that she was the victim of a crime. Kate, although exhausted, remained in touch, helping in every possible way with the collection of information. Chicago police continued to check exits and entries into the city. Finally, Hawkins called Jake late Tuesday evening and said there was a lead from a taxi driver who had seen a car similar to the description at night, but there was no clarity in the details, just a general silhouette. This again did not lead to anything concrete. So, after scrolling through dozens of hours of video recordings from different sections of the road and receiving only vague hints, Jake understood that the matter could drag on. However, he couldn't wrap his head around how, in such a huge city, Emily seemed to have fallen through the ground. Has no one noticed two men carrying a semi-conscious girl? In the depths of his soul, he hoped that maybe the criminals had not foreseen something and left a clue. Everything inside him was beating, demanding action. Having been in war, he saw more terrible situations, but there was its own logic, clear opponents. Here he was faced with an unknown threat, which, in fact, tore his wife out of the safe world and carried her away. At night he had nightmares. He was running along the corridors of some gigantic building, trying to open the doors, and behind each one there was emptiness. In one of his dreams, he sees Emily, who silently looks at him, and then she is taken away by two people in black. He would wake up in a cold sweat, clutching the pistol he carried in a holster at his belt. "Hold on, Em, hold on," he repeated to himself, either in the car, or in the corridors of the station, or in some nook where he was interviewing potential witnesses. But so far all they had was fragmentary footage from the club's cameras, which showed two men mixing something into Emily's glass and then leading her away, and then blurry shots of a minivan taking her away to an unknown destination. Every day passed without news, hitting my nerves. Kate was tormented by remorse, but she did not give up. She appeared every morning at the station, bringing coffee and reminding her to hold on. Hawkins, despite official restrictions, tried to help more than usual apparently. He was also attracted by the fate of a young woman married to a policeman. But the case was still officially classified as missing person probable kidnapping. We won't stop, Jake thought, looking out the dark office window, even if we have to turn over every stone in this city. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his sanity. His heart sank from one thought: what if he didn't make it in time? But he drove away such assumptions from himself. I must save her, he repeated to himself, at all costs. And this gave him the strength to continue the fight against an unknown enemy who challenged his entire world. Emily returned home late Tuesday evening, several agonizingly long days after his mysterious disappearance. It happened suddenly. Disheveled, pale, she appeared on the porch of her and Jake's house in Blackwood without warning, as if she had broken through a veil of uncertainty. No one accompanied her. There were no police officers or ambulances, as if she herself had come from somewhere or hitched a ride. When Jake heard the creak of the front door and ran into the hall, he was momentarily speechless from the overwhelming emotions. Emily stood looking at him with a distant look. She was wearing the same blue dress in which she left for Chicago, but it was pretty wrinkled, in some places even torn at the seams. The hair is disheveled. There are reddish marks around the wrists, as if from tight bracelets or ropes. There is a shadow of fatigue and confusion on the face. He rushed to her and hugged her, wanting to immediately find out everything, to make sure that it was really her, alive and unharmed. However, Emily only weakly pushed him away with her hands. Jake, I, I'm sorry, she whispered, as if she couldn't find the right words. Tears welled up in her eyes. He wanted to ask her who, how, and why, but seeing her condition, he decided to first help her enter the house and sit her on the sofa in the living room. I myself was shaking and was on the verge of calling an ambulance because I didn't understand whether she was physically okay. However, Emily assured that now she just needs to stay home and recover a little. I can handle it, she whispered as Jake handed her a glass of water. I'm sorry that I disappeared like that. A storm was raging inside Jake. He spent so many days in tireless search, without sleep, without food, calling all possible areas, hospitals, looking through camera footage with detectives in Chicago. And now Emily suddenly appears on her own, unaccompanied. But he suppressed the first impulsive desire to attack with questions. Military training dictated. First ensure safety, give her the opportunity to rest, let her tell her when she is ready. The most important thing is that you're alive, he said quietly, kneeling down next to the sofa and squeezing her hand. If you are in pain or need something, tell me. We have a first aid kit. You can go to the hospital. And please promise that we will talk about everything as soon as you feel better. She just nodded, not taking her reddened eyes off of him. That look expressed so much pain and guilt at the same time that Jake's heart sank. Throwing a thin blanket over her, he gave her the opportunity to warm up and, if possible, sleep. However, the anxiety in my soul did not subside, and hundreds of questions came into my head. Only closer to morning, when the first rays of the sun touched the windows and she was fast asleep, he tiptoed out into the hallway and called Detective Hawkins, who was leading the case in Chicago. He, as soon as he heard that Emily had been found, immediately demanded clarification. Where is she? In what condition? Did you say anything? But Jake could only answer that Emily was unable to speak. Hawkins insisted that he would come himself, and indeed, by lunchtime, a car with the emblem of the Chicago Police Department pulled up into the yard of the Reynolds house. Two more officers arrived with him. Their appearance brought Emily out of her drowsiness. She rose to her feet, staggered, but managed to sit down at the dining table. Her gaze was still dull. Dr. Carter from the small hospital where she had once been a patient also showed interest in her condition, but Emily did not want any medical examinations. It's okay, she repeated stubbornly. Hawkins, having examined her, wanted to ask direct questions, but Jake asked for tact. Detective, she was in shock. Let her come to her senses a little. I know you're waiting for testimony, but... Of course, Hawkins nodded. But you must understand that we need information. We have detained two suspects believed to be involved in her disappearance. The same ones who were identified from the footage from the cameras in the club. And here's what's strange. Their testimony looks ridiculous, but I admit it adds confusion to the whole picture. What are they saying? Jake frowned. The detective looked at Emily doubtfully, as if he wasn't sure if she was ready to listen. They say that your wife voluntarily got into their car. Moreover, according to them, it was almost she herself who asked to be taken away. Like she had a plan to fake her own kidnapping. It sounds crazy, you will agree. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Absurd. Emily couldn't ask some strangers to mix something with her and kidnap her. This is illogical and goes against her character. Yes, Emily is not a perfect angel, but it seemed crazy that she voluntarily agreed to disappear, scaring everyone half to death. He turned to Emily, looking for indignation or at least fear on her face, but instead he saw strange confusion. She frowned, looked away, and did not protest or deny. He asked quietly, they're lying, right? Tell them they're lying. But she just continued to sit, pressing her hands to her chest. Finally, as if through force, she said, I need time. I'm confused. Hawkins shifted his body weight from one leg to the other and looked at his men in bewilderment. We don't require immediate explanations, but we still want to hear your version, Emily. We continue to work with these two, but for now we have their words. She herself wanted to leave. She had reasons. Some moments smack of cheap staging, but the evidence, the same recordings, traces of a struggle in the corridor still point to violence. It seems their version is false. However, we need confirmation from you. I, Emily paused. Her face was distorted by a painful grimace, and she turned to the window. Sorry, detective. I can't right now. Hawkins' eyes showed sympathy. After all, she had recently experienced serious trauma, and he, as a person, is not a stranger to understanding. He suggested that they could go to the station the next day when she felt stronger. Emily's loquaciousness was at zero, and Jake felt that he also did not have enough moral resources to put pressure on his wife. Although he lived between anger and tenderness, he recognized that she needed peace. So the detective and the officers left, promising to return later. Jake was left alone in the house with his wife. A heavy silence hung in the living room. He tried to cook dinner for her, but felt that his hands were not obeying him. My thoughts were confused. What is this absurd story? Why do these people want to put the blame on her, as if everything was voluntary? And why is Emily acting so strange? In the evening, he sat her down next to him on an old sofa, covered her with a warm blanket, and tried to speak calmly. I don't want to put pressure on you, but please explain what's going on. I saw the recording. You are being taken away by two men. You are clearly feeling bad. What do you think? Are they lying? She pursed her lips. Her eyes looked somewhere into the distance. She seemed to be struggling with an explosion of emotions inside. Finally, she whispered, "Of course, I didn't ask them to take me away. And I certainly didn't want to stage a kidnapping. But I don't remember everything." "But do you remember some parts?" Jake asked softly. "Can you tell me a little about what happened after the club?" She shuddered as if she had been pierced by a needle of memory. "The corridor. Everything was swimming before my eyes. Then they slipped me some other liquid, a glass. Then I don't remember. Everything was in a fog. It was as if I was under some kind of powerful anesthesia. At the moments when I came to my senses, people flashed around me. Not sure if it's the same man or someone else. It seemed to me that someone was watching me and asking questions. I fell into oblivion again and again. And then, she paused, clasped her fingers so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Then I ended up in a motel, then in a hospital, from where I escaped. They took me to some crossroads outside the city. I ran and ran, until I reached the highway. I caught a ride, so I came back here. Officially, it sounded pretty similar to what Jake had suspected before. Kidnapping, psychotropic drugs, possibly extortion. But why then do the suspects insist that she herself is involved in all this? Why do they say that? He asked the question quietly, looking at his wife with the hope that she would give a clear answer. "I don't know," Emily answered in a whisper. "Maybe this is their way of avoiding responsibility, or—" She paused and lowered her gaze. "Maybe they had some kind of order." "Order?" Jake asked, feeling cold. "Are you saying that someone from your circle could have ordered your kidnapping? But why?" "I don't know." She sadly covered her face with her palms. "Please, don't torment me with questions." Jake felt irritation boiling inside him. He understood that his wife was under stress, but in his experience, it happened that people were afraid to tell the truth because of threats. Perhaps she is afraid of the kidnapper's revenge. Perhaps she was forced to sign some papers, or were they blackmailing her with something personal? So several days passed in a painful atmosphere of understatement. Emily hardly left the house, except that at Jake's insistence, she visited a local clinic, where she underwent a general examination. However, the results showed that the main threat had passed, except for stress and severe exhaustion. She was morally depressed and avoided communication, even with her loved ones. Her mother and father came, but their meetings were strained and short. Emily did not admit that anyone had abused her and did not give details. The parents, naturally, were perplexed, but did not want to put pressure so as not to injure their daughter even more. Soon Jake learned that there are two suspects, certain Greg Ross and Martin Wallace, previously convicted of petty theft and illegal trafficking in prescription drugs. Their names surfaced during an operational check among dealers selling prohibited substances, and video footage from the club helped identify them. Chicago police captured both of them in a brothel on the outskirts of the city. At first impression, these were typical petty criminals, but they remained silent regarding serious articles, limiting themselves to the version that Emily herself wanted to escape from her husband and organize a kidnapping scenario. When Hawkins asked follow-up questions, they were confused about the details, but stubbornly repeated the same story. One day, when Jake himself went to Chicago to talk with Hawkins and look those people in the eyes, he felt a surge of rage. When they met in the corridor of the station, he barely had enough self-control not to cling to Greg Ross, who was being led under escort. But Hawkins managed to stop him, threatening that physical aggression would interfere with the investigation. "Listen, officer," Ross said mockingly, following Jake with a prickly look. "Your wife herself was torn from her quiet, boring life. We just helped her break away from reality a little. You see, she even had a bottle of pills with her." Jake wanted to hit him, but he clenched his teeth and forced himself to breathe more evenly. "These are lies," he repeated mentally. One could only guess why the criminals insisted on such an absurd story. Meanwhile, Emily was acting increasingly distant at home. She barely spoke to Jake, spending hours in silence, looking out the window or lying on the sofa with a book, but not turning the pages. Sometimes it seemed that she was about to say something important, but she pursed her lips and closed herself off. Jake felt a wall growing between them. He knew that he should be there to support him, but doubts haunted him. What if there is some truth in this story? After all, how can we explain that she didn't scream for help on camera, although she might have been too drugged? Or why is he silent now, when everyone is demanding clarity? Emily's life in her native Blackwood, after returning, she was not the same at all. Many residents of the town, noticing that she looked exhausted and was acting distant, began to whisper various rumors. Someone claimed that she had tied up with bandits. Someone condemned, believing that it was her own fault for drinking in nightclubs. The most cynical of all was the gossip about a fake kidnapping for attention. Emily reacted painfully and tried not to go out or go shopping. Her class at school was temporarily taught by other teachers as the administration decided to give her a sick leave until she recovered. Jake felt that their relationship had become tense, almost alien. At night, he woke up, noticing that Emily is lying next to her in bed, but her gaze is empty, and she is not sleeping, but looking at the ceiling. He wanted to hold her to him, to tell her that everything would be fine, but he felt that she was withdrawing into herself. Love and suspicion fought in him. "No, she is not capable of deception," said his mind. But almost immediately, scenes with recordings from the club and the bandits' absurd statements that Emily herself wanted this appeared before her eyes. Doubts sharpened my brain. One day, when he returned from interrogation at the station, where he was again dealing with Ross's testimony, he approached Emily, who was sitting in the kitchen, and asked directly, "Tell me if you had even the slightest intention to set something up. Maybe to blackmail someone, to leave secretly from me. Tell me now. I will listen and understand as much as possible." She looked at him in amazement, and pain flashed in her eyes. "You. And you also believe that I could organize my tragedy myself?" His heart sank. He shook his head. "No, sorry. They just confuse everyone, and we still don't know the whole truth about what happened to you. I love you, Em, but we have become strangers. I feel like you're not telling me something." She looked down into the mug of cooled tea. I'm afraid that they will come back. I'm afraid I'll fall into a trap again. I'm afraid of Nathan, if he really is behind everything." Jake sighed heavily, once again feeling a mixture of compassion and anger. The heaviness tormented him too. It was as if there was a stone lying on his soul. But he decided to be there no matter what. Time passed. The official investigation moved slowly. Ross and Wallace, who were arrested, faced prison sentences for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and mixing of substances, but the case was complicated by the ambiguous version of consent of the victim. The prosecutor insisted that all the evidence confirmed violence, but the defendant's lawyers exaggerated the theme of the allegedly voluntary nature of the meeting. After all, there is no obvious scene of resistance in the video, except for one moment in the corridor where Emily is exhausted. But the hardest moments happened at home, when Emily started talking to herself, or rather with the ghosts of the past. Jake caught her in the kitchen one day muttering, "It was him. It was him. I saw his eyes." He approached and anxiously asked who he was talking about, but she waved it off in fear. "Nothing, leave me." Late at night when they went to bed, he felt Emily snuggle up to him for the first time in weeks, as if seeking protection. He hugged her, silently, without further questioning, and through the silence of former mistrust, a tiny spark of former intimacy broke through. At that moment, Jake felt that, despite all the pain and doubts, he was still ready to fight for her, for their union. Even though a shadow of doubt hung over her secrets, he sensed that behind her lay a deeply traumatized soul in need of support, not interrogation. Perhaps he did not know all the details, why Emily seemed like a stranger to him, what kind of fear made her withdraw into herself. Perhaps part of the truth will remain only in her memory, the events of that terrible night, which she either does not remember in detail or does not want to remember. But he refused to believe that she could willingly get involved in such madness. This means that their marriage can still be saved if he finds the key to her trust. Emily hasn't been sleeping very well lately. She had difficulty falling asleep and almost always woke up in the middle of the night, clutching the blanket in a panic, her heart beating wildly. Jake, hearing her muffled moans and convulsive sobs, tried to calm her down every time, took her hand, quietly whispered that she was safe. But even his warmth could not drive away the strange visions that haunted Emily in her sleep. At first, she dreamed of snippets of the events of that ill-fated night. A club, loud music, neon lights, someone's silhouettes. But gradually, the nightmares became more and more frightening and illogical. In them, she saw herself in that very motel, the one where she was found unconscious. Only in these dreams, she was not a victim. She did not lie on the bed pale and exhausted. She did not beg for help. On the contrary, she participated in some sex scenes. Waking up, she could not shake the feeling that these nightmares were too realistic. Her eyes remained wide, and sweat appeared on her forehead. And worst of all, she was not sure that all this was just a product of a dream. Sometimes a wild thought flashed through her mind. What if something like that really happened that night, which she simply doesn't remember? The next day, as Emily sat limp and pale in the kitchen, trying to force herself to swallow at least a piece of toast, Jake entered the room with a frown on his face and her bag in his hands. The same one with whom she went to Chicago. He took a neatly folded piece of paper from his inner pocket. "What is this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm, but there was tension in it. Emily looked up in confusion. "I don't know. Where did you find this?" In the secret pocket of the bag, Jake put the piece of paper on the table. "Looks like your handwriting. Or so it seems to me." Emily leaned closer to read. There were only 3 words on the paper, written unevenly, as if hastily. "Don't trust the mirror." Everything inside her went cold. The handwriting was indeed somewhat similar to her own. The letters N and R were written exactly as she wrote in her personal notes. But the recording looked like it was convulsive, made under stress or in a state of passion. "I don't remember writing this," Emily muttered, pulling away. "I don't know where it came from." "Maybe you made some notes while in shock," Jake suggested, carefully peering into her face. "Or did someone forge your handwriting?" Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. She was already tormented by anxiety, and here was a new mysterious circumstance. "Don't trust the mirror" sounds almost like a warning or instruction. "For what?" "I couldn't write it," she whispered, not daring to look Jake in the eye. "I don't even understand what we're talking about." He frowned as he noticed her hands shaking. She herself looked frightened, dumbfounded. Doubts drove him crazy. If she was lying, she was pretending to believe. And if she really didn't write anything, then what kind of curiosity is this? Maybe you'll remember something. Either way, he sighed, Detective Hawkins needs to know about this. Go to a psychologist or psychiatrist who could help you restore your memory. Emily shuddered at these words. Psychologist, memory. She was horrified at the thought that things even worse than uncontrollable nightmares could be hiding in her mind. But it was impossible to ignore what was happening. The very next day, the story took another crazy turn. In the morning, Kate burst into their home, pale as a sheet. She had her phone in her hand and nervously clicked on the screen. Emily, Jake, she began in a slurred voice. Did you see this? What's happened? Emily felt the familiar fear when she noticed the expression on her friend's face. Look, Kate put the phone in her hands. This is an anonymous account on one social network. There are photos posted here. Photos of you from that night. Jake moved closer to see the screen. There really were pictures. Emily in that same blue dress, with a cocktail in her hand, and next to her were two men. The same ones, Greg Ross and Martin Wallace. And in these photos, she doesn't look like a victim at all. She smiles, almost laughs, hugs them by the shoulders, and brings the glass to his lips. How? Emily whispered, turning pale as she scrolled through a few more frames. In one photo, she stands with her head on Ross's shoulder, as if she is flirting. In another, she leans towards Wallace, as if she is saying something in his ear, and at the same time, she looks absolutely conscious. No traces of fear, no hint of resistance. Jake, not believing his eyes, grabbed the phone. Is this a montage? Kate shrugged. I don't know. The quality is not great, but it doesn't look like crude Photoshop. And if it's editing, it's very professional. Emily clasped her hands over her face, feeling her mouth go dry. But I don't remember anything like that. I didn't exactly have fun with them. I'm sure they mixed something in with me. How then? She looked at Jake, lost. But he still peered at the photographs. His heart sank. If these pictures were real, it turns out that his wife was lying, or at least did not tell the whole truth about how she communicated with the kidnappers. Kate, Jake finally squeezed out, suppressing his anger and bewilderment. Who posted this? An anonymous account with no name, just a nickname like Knight Rider 77. And he also writes something in the comments. A boring teacher who decided to have a blast. She was looking for adventure herself. There is no kidnapping here. Nasty hints. Oh my God. Emily gasped, feeling as if the floor was falling away from under her feet. Her chest felt tight. No matter where she turned, facts appeared that cast doubt on her version of the violence and abduction. Do you think these are the two, Ross and Wallace? Kate asked. Maybe they agreed with someone to discredit you. They're in the cell now, Jake objected. True, they may have accomplices. Or if there really is someone else behind everything, for example, the same Nathan, Emily's ex, then it is quite possible that this is his doing. Emily stood up abruptly, putting the phone away, and walked around the room with trembling steps. I need to breathe. I can't. She looked like she was ready to pass out. Kate instantly grabbed her arm and helped her sit on the sofa. Jake opened the window, letting in a breath of fresh air even though it was cold and windy outside. Calm down, breathe, Kate whispered, trying to help her friend. But this is... Emily grabbed the edge of the sofa. I don't know how this could happen. Was I really conscious and acting? Like this? Jake couldn't answer right away. He, too, was in a state of shock. In recent weeks, he wanted with all his heart to trust his wife, to believe that she had been kidnapped by force. And suddenly on the screen, there is a photo where she looks joyful. This breaks the whole idea of what happened. Detective Hawkins, having arrived in Blackwood, wanted to get an explanation from Emily regarding these photographs, but she could not give anything intelligible. I don't remember. She repeated during interrogation with a trembling voice. I don't remember these hugs. I don't remember laughing with them. Listen, Hawkins tried to remain neutral. We're not saying that you're lying. But maybe there is some other motive. You say you were kidnapped. They claim that everything was consensual, and the photographs indicate rather agreement. But there is also a recording from cameras where it is clear that they were mixing something in with me, Emily exclaimed. So they deceived me. I might not have understood what I was doing. It's possible, but show at least some purpose, meaning. Why did you have to drink with them, smile, if you just met? Hawkins looked into her eyes intently. Emily hung her head helplessly. She couldn't find a logical answer herself. The don't trust the mirror notes, terrible nightmares about the ritual, and these photographs where she looks completely normal, all this turned reality upside down. Kate, who was nearby, stood silently, pressing her lips. She also felt uneasy. From the very beginning, she considered Emily a victim, blaming herself for losing sight of her friend. But now, at times, there was a hint of doubt in her gaze, as if she was asking herself, what if Emily really is hiding something? Returning home from another visit to the police, Jake and Emily were alone in the living room. The lamp by the sofa burned with a soft, muted light reflected in the windows. The blue twilight was gathering outside the windows. Emily sat with her arms wrapped around herself in a warm jacket, but still shaking. Jake gently touched her shoulder. Um, let's try to figure it out together. Without strangers. Tell me in order all what you remember about that night down to the smallest detail. Maybe we can find an explanation together. She was silent for a long time, apparently collecting her thoughts. Then she spoke, staring blankly into the shadow cast by the floor lamp. I danced with Kate, cocktails, and music. Then I decided to freshen up in the restroom and washed my face. I felt a little dizzy, but not critical. Then some unfamiliar man came up and asked if I was okay. Looks like one of the ones in the photo. He spoke politely. I thought he was just caring. Maybe he suggested having a drink together. Even then, my consciousness was cloudy. I remember how I felt a little carried away. Perhaps I drank something else without realizing it. And then, fog. I remember a fragment of me sitting on a sofa in the lounge area, laughing at some stupid joke of theirs. Then again, emptiness. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, as if protecting herself from the icy wind. Next memory, I'm in the corridor, and then I feel bad. And I also see that one of them adds something to my glass, or brings a pill to my lips. I tried to resist, but my body did not listen, and then it was completely black. Again, as if I drew somewhere, and I woke up in the motel already half dead. Jake listened attentively, without interruptions. But at the same time, unkind thoughts were pulsating in my head. What about the photographs where she looks fine, without any blackness in her eyes? Maybe it was a gap-some moment when, under the influence of substances, euphoria was replaced by memory lapses. After all, some drugs cause a dual reaction. A person looks cheerful and active, but then amnesia occurs. Okay, he said finally, trying to speak softly. Suppose they deceived you and mixed in a drug that made you lose control of yourself. This might explain the smiles in the photo. You could feel cheerful, friendly. But why don't you remember these pictures then? Emily shook her head, and her eyes suddenly lit up with despair. You see, I get the feeling that some kind of black hole happened that night. And if someone says that I did crazy things, I cannot refute it. I don't remember. It's crazy. Jake slowly covered her hands with his palms. Listen, I want to believe you, but you see how everything looks from the outside. Sorry, but even I sometimes wonder, what if it was I don't know, unconscious, but initiative? Emily squeezed his hand and looked at him pleadingly. I won't lie. Sometimes I was bored in our small town. Sometimes I complained to Kate that my life was monotonous school, home, but not to such an extent as to stage a kidnapping. God, Jake, not only did I suffer from this, but so did everyone close to me. What a stupid joke. Her voice trembled, and she almost burst out screaming, restraining herself at the last moment. Jake realized he couldn't push too hard. He pulled her into his arms and let her cry on his shoulder. There were many questions on the tip of her tongue. About that night, about the note, about the ritual in her nightmares. But he decided that now she could not stand new questions. Jake stared at the folder that Private Investigator Tom Crow handed him. Thick cover, inside several thin sheets, neatly folded notes, and a couple of photographs. Emily herself could be seen in these photographs. Judging by the file dates, it appeared that they were taken 5 or 6 months before the ill-fated trip to Chicago. The pictures did not seem unusual. Emily was sitting at a table in a cafe with some woman a little older than her, obviously a psychotherapist. But it was this woman who was now becoming the key to new questions. Jake took a deep breath. For several weeks now, he has been trying to understand what happened in Emily's life. First, her mysterious disappearance, conflicting evidence, scandalous photographs that appeared on the internet in which she almost beams with joy next to her alleged kidnappers. All this creates such a confusing picture that the Chicago police are at a loss, and the hometown of Blackwood is doing nothing but gossiping and spreading rumors. Some feel sorry for Emily, seeing her as a victim of someone's sinister plans, while others willingly believe that she herself arranged an adventure for herself, tired of the measured life in the province. And against the backdrop of all this, Jake hired Tom Crow, an old acquaintance from Army circles, who after his service opened his own detective agency. Tom promised to be discreet and careful in the excavations so as not to stir up an even bigger scandal. But the very first fruits of his work shocked Jake. It turned out that several months before the incident in Chicago, Emily secretly visited a psychotherapist, specializing in the treatment of severe stress disorders using hypnosis. "I don't understand why she didn't say anything," Jake admitted quietly, leafing through the papers. "We always tried not to keep secrets from each other. Even if she had problems with sleep or anxiety, she could talk to me." Tom Crow, a fit man of about 40, with a calm gaze, straightened the collar of his jacket and shook his head. "Judging by what I managed to find out, she didn't want anyone to know about the sessions. I spoke with one woman who was sitting at the reception desk of a local clinic at the time. She remembered that Emily came to late appointments several times, closer to closing. The schedule was somehow special, and she paid in cash." "Cash?" Jake asked, frowning. "But why didn't she pay in the usual way, through insurance or a bank card?" "A question we don't have an answer to yet," Tom sighed. "But what's more interesting is that the clinic cannot provide any records of the sessions. Dr. Avery quit about a month ago and moved away. Moreover, apparently, all her personal archives have disappeared. Officially, they say that the records were destroyed when the founder changed, but this looks too suspicious." Jake felt a familiar sense of anxiety rise within him. He had encountered similar stories more than once in police practice, when people with specific skills such as suggestion, hypnosis, manipulation became involved in various adventures and criminal schemes. But imagining his wife being involved in something like this was painful and scary. "You said that this doctor had a reputation for being unconventional," he clarified, recalling Tom's words. "Let's just say that Dr. Avery verbally adhered to generally accepted methods of psychotherapy, but she had patients who claimed that she started talking about some esoteric practices. Someone talked about occult rituals, but there were few specifics. It is quite possible that these are just rumors. However, hypnosis worries me. Imagine if during sessions the client is suggested to something, and then does not realize at all that he has succumbed to programming. So you're saying that Emily could have been implanted with false memories or somehow controlled her actions?" Jake asked gloomily. "It's possible. Hypnosis is a powerful tool. Of course, not everything is as primitive as in cheap films, where a person is forced to commit crimes at the snap of his fingers. But if the sessions were carried out using dubious methods, and even against the background of stress or personal problems, in general, this can explain a lot." Tom shook his head. "But I need more time and resources to dig up details about Dr. Avery." Jake put the folder down. He felt that he needed to talk to Emily, but lately she had been in such a depressed and confused state that every mention of the past sowed even more fear in her. Sometimes she would retire to the bedroom, close the door, and when she came out, her eyes would be red from tears. Or suddenly she would be overcome by causeless anxiety. She would look at her reflection in the mirror and try to look away, repeating under her breath the phrase from a note she had recently found: "Don't trust the mirror." That strange note, which has been driving everyone crazy in recent days, popped up literally out of nowhere. It was found in Emily's bag during another police check of her belongings. The paper was covered in a handwriting that was certainly similar to Emily's, but she swore that she had never written such words. "What does 'don't trust the mirror' mean?" Jake asked her. Maybe you wrote this in some kind of semi-conscious state, trying to warn yourself, or is it just a joke that you've already forgotten?" To which Emily just shook her head, repeating that she didn't remember anything like that. But at the same time, she was scared out of her wits. She avoided looking in mirrors, and one day Jake caught her in the bathroom, pasting strips of paper on the mirror cabinet, covering her own reflection. "I'm tired of looking at myself," she whispered. "It's like it's not me there, but someone else." In this atmosphere of shadows and half-light, Jake realized, we need a professional who can dot the I's. That's why he decided to hire a private detective, and he quickly discovered information about psychotherapy and hypnosis. Now it remains to understand how this relates to the story of the kidnapping. Could Dr. Avery really inspire Emily to do some crazy things? Or did someone else, using these suggestions, turn on the necessary triggers at a certain moment? Crow continued his investigation, and Jake at this time was trying to somehow improve his life. Every day he saw that Emily was not getting better. At night she had nightmares in which she saw herself not as a victim in a motel, but as an active participant in some mysterious ritual. In the strange twilight of the same run-down room, she sat with a candle in her hand, singing something incomprehensible, and around there were people in masks. Sometimes she would wake up in a cold sweat and scream that she saw a bloody mirror on the wall or a distorted reflection of herself laughing in her face. Jake called the doctors several times, but Emily categorically refused to go to the hospital. At a minimum, she agreed to a visit from a family psychologist, who was suggested by a mutual friend, but that conversation was difficult and, it seems, did not particularly clarify anything. Emily became increasingly withdrawn, repeating only, "I don't know what's real and what's not." Perhaps we are dealing with post-traumatic disorder. A psychologist who examined her at home expressed his opinion. When a person has experienced mental or physical abuse, the brain can replace or distort memories. But the fact that she denies the very fact of writing the note, although the handwriting is similar, suggests a dissociative state when a person can act but is not aware of it. Jake just listened silently. Fragments of the police report flashed through his mind. Photos of Emily hugging her alleged kidnappers, evidence of her being conscious and smiling. All this was contrary to her tears and confusion. "I don't remember, I didn't want to, they forced me." Feeling that you need to act more decisively, Jake met with Tom Crow again to discuss next steps. They went into a local cafe and took a table in the far corner. The waitress brought them coffee and sandwiches, and after waiting until no one was listening, Tom told them about the new discovery. "I found out that Dr. Avery, after leaving our clinic, moved to a neighboring state. A journalist friend helped me find out that she works in a private mental health center that is associated with some kind of Institute of Alternative Consciousness. Sounds like another near-religious sect or something like that. So maybe she's connected to a cult." Jake's eyes narrowed. "I can't confidently say cult yet, but everything indicates that they practice a mixture of psychological and esoteric methods. What if Emily fell under the influence of this woman and she could transfer her suggestibility to someone else? Do you think this explains why Emily sometimes seems completely different?" Jake asked in a heavy tone. "Yes, perhaps, in certain states, she actually behaved as these pictures show. And other Emily who was subconsciously forced to participate in strange actions. And the rest of the time, it's our ordinary Emily, who has absolutely no memory of what happened." Jake leaned back in his chair. My heart was pounding with anxiety and anger. It was hard to believe that someone could switch a person's consciousness, like switching channels on a TV. But he was ready to allow this, just to find an explanation for the nightmares and contradictions. And what next? "We can't just barge into this center and start interrogating Dr. Avery," he noted, gritting his teeth. "Exactly. But we can try to come to an agreement. I've already written her a letter introducing myself as a possible patient." Tom grinned cautiously. If she answers, I will try to conduct an introductory consultation and at the same time find out what kind of program they have there. Risky. Jake thought that Avery might well recognize Tom as a detective or suspect something was wrong. But it's better than doing nothing. Having agreed on the next steps, Jake went home. Emily was sitting in the living room that evening with Kate. A friend had come to visit her. She had long been reproaching herself for the ill-fated party in Chicago, where everything happened. Seeing Jake, Kate stood up, took him aside, and said quietly, "She's having nightmares again. She says someone is calling her name in the mirror, and this is not her voice. Jake, I'm afraid for her. Maybe you'll think about taking her somewhere far away for a while." Jake froze, feeling his inside shrink. He understood that Emily really needed a change of scenery, but avoiding problems would not work. Maybe after Tom finds out about Dr. Avery, we'll know how best to help, he answered quietly. Thank you for not leaving her, Kate. Another week has passed, during which Emily's life flowed as if in a half-asleep mode. She almost didn't go out anywhere, only occasionally trying to go to the store or take a ride to the city center, but other people's glances and whispers depressed her to the point of tears. Every day she woke up with a vague memory of the motel, of candles, of a mirror that seemed to appear to her in a dream in a split form. This frightened Jake even more after all, if, as Tom suggests, there is someone else's suggestion in her head, then who guarantees that this trigger will not be activated again? Tom, for his part, tried to contact Dr. Avery, and a couple of days later he called Jake, saying that she had agreed to conduct an introductory consultation with him via video conference. Of course, he could not openly ask questions about Emily. This would only alert the therapist. I had to play the role of an interested client who has problems with sleep and anxiety. Later, telling Jake about this conversation, Tom was terse. She made a strange impression on me. On the one hand, the speech is like that of an ordinary psychologist. Professional terminology, questions about the causes of stress, childhood traumas. On the other hand, from time to time she slipped into some vague esoteric formulas, and at the end she suddenly suggested that I sign up for a deep reboot session at their center. It costs a lot of money, and you know what's interesting. She mentioned, "We do not accept everyone, only those who are ready for complete trust." Jake shook his head grimly. Looks like a sectarian bait. To the point. I haven't figured it out yet, haven't said yes or mentioned no. She asked for a response within 2 days. I think I'll agree to a session, Tom said quietly. We need to see this center and Dr. Avery with our own eyes. Maybe then I can get to the bottom of whether Emily's name comes up there. Jake clenched his hands nervously. The prospect of Tom going there undercover was seriously unsettling. You never know who else is connected to Dr. Avery. What if the very people who mixed Emily with illegal substances end up in this network? Or, even worse, the person who ordered the kidnapping, if he really exists, is somehow affiliated with the center. Okay, he said quietly. Just be extremely careful, Tom. If anything goes wrong, call immediately. Having agreed on the plan, they said goodbye, and Jake returned to his official affairs, where he also had enough worries. But all this time he couldn't get the thought out of his head. Emily could become a pawn in someone else's game. Or did she really once decide to radically change her life, but did not take into account the consequences? Two extremes gave no rest. In the evening, at late dinner, he worked up the courage to talk to Emily about hypnotherapy again. To his surprise, she did not push away his questions, but only tiredly lowered her eyes. Yes, I went to a psychotherapist, but I didn't know she used hypnosis for such strange purposes. I wanted to get rid of anxiety and insomnia. After the death of my grandfather, I was depressed, and for you She hesitated. I was ashamed to admit I thought I could handle it myself or with the help of a specialist. So you actually paid her in cash to keep it a secret, Jake said quietly. Emily nodded, hiding her gaze. She said that standard therapy can take a long time, and she has a faster method that regular insurance does not cover, and I agreed. The sessions were unusual, but I didn't attach any importance then. She took me into a deep trance state and supposedly helped me free my subconscious from fears. It even worked the first couple of times. I had fewer nightmares and became calmer. But then, in the third or fourth session, I suddenly began to feel something wrong. It's as if she's delving into my memory and rewriting something there. I interrupted her mid-sentence and said that I would not return again. And how did she react? Jake's heart sank in alarm. She smiled and said that, as soon as I am ready for the truth, I will return. I felt uneasy. I left and tried to forget it all. But then, weeks later, I discovered that some clear memories of my childhood, for example, were missing. It scared me, but I didn't want to worry you or anyone else. I hoped that it would go away on its own. His wife's confession hit Jake hard. He realized how she suffered alone, afraid of condemnation or new problems. And now this could all be part of that big, ominous story in which Emily found herself drawn. He gently touched her hand. I'm sorry I didn't notice how bad you were. I promise we'll figure it out. My detective friend is already on the trail of this woman, Dr. Avery. Perhaps she is the key to this whole nightmare. Emily looked at him with timid hope and seemed to relax a little, as if the load had become lighter for a moment. But in the depths of her eyes there remained a dark reflection of fear. What if everything is much more complicated? What if those people from the motel are just the visible part of the iceberg, and behind the scenes there is an entire organization, or worse, an entire network? For now, they could only wait until Tom returns from the Institute of Alternative Consciousness with new information. Time passed slowly, each night turning into another nightmare for Emily, or worse, sleepless anxiety. Sometimes Jake would wake up and find her in the living room, wearing only a robe, sitting with a cup of iced tea, silently staring into space. She said that she dreams of a mirror in which an unfamiliar woman is reflected, and she hears a whisper, "Don't trust the mirror, it lies." All these oddities, scraps of hypnotherapy, missing recordings, a secret psychoclinic together made it clear that there's something deeper behind the kidnapping story, perhaps even more terrible than ordinary crime. But neither Jake, nor the police, nor Emily herself could yet get to the bottom of it. Some progress began to emerge when new anonymous posts began to appear on the internet, not only with photographs of Emily joyful and hugging criminals, but also strange screenshots of some documents. In each post, an anonymous user claimed that the truth is that Emily remembers everything. These posts shook the already unstable public atmosphere around the Reynolds family. Someone assured that this is 100% proof of her double life. Someone believed that black propaganda against Emily continues. Jake became more and more gloomy and nervous, but tried to hold on for the sake of his wife. He understood that the slightest doubt in her would be a betrayal. Although, alas, even inside him sometimes thoughts flashed. What if at least some of these terrible rumors are true? After all, it cannot be denied that some of her behavior, even before the abduction, raised questions. And these doubts, albeit weak, poisoned Jake's soul and intensified his internal conflict. Emily herself felt his tension, but only became more withdrawn. It seemed that she herself needed time to accept everything that had happened, to cope with the feeling of guilt and enormous fear. More than 2 weeks have passed since Tom made an appointment with Dr. Avery. He didn't get in touch all this time, only sending short SMS. "I'm collecting information, I can't talk yet. Everything here is more complicated than I thought. I'll be back soon, don't worry." Jake was unnerved by this, but he could not do anything. Interference could disrupt Tom's hidden operation. One of these evenings, Emily suddenly asked Jake to take her to the very motel where she was eventually found unconscious. He was terribly surprised and at first refused, but she was adamant. "I want to see this place myself, maybe then my memory will clear up." Looking at how she was trembling, having difficulty finding words, but still insisting, he gave up. "Okay, we'll go on the weekend," he nodded. "But promise me that if you feel scared or ill, we will leave right away." She nodded, and something like determination flashed in her eyes. Perhaps this was the first sign that she wanted to deal with her memories herself, without waiting for other people's answers. But was it worth the risk of plunging yourself into a place associated with such a nightmare? Jake hoped this trip wouldn't break her even more. So, while waiting for a visit to the motel and news from Tom Crow, the life of the Reynolds family reached a new level. A fork in the road loomed before them. Either they would be able to get to the bottom of the truth about the ill-fated hypnosis sessions and those who took advantage of Emily's consciousness programming, or they risk forever remaining trapped in suspicions, fragmentary memories, and mirror images that cannot be trusted. Left alone with anxiety, Jake increasingly repeated one thought to himself: I won't retreat until I find out everything. And in his soul there was an insistent voice, as if someone was whispering to him, almost like in Emily's nightmares: don't trust the mirror, don't trust other people's pictures, and maybe don't even trust your own memory. Emily hardly remembered how she found herself in this neglected corridor of the underground floor, a former warehouse or basement, where the damp air smelled of old rags and mold. Tom Crow called her and Jake when he found out that psychotherapist Avery, the same woman who once led her hypnosis sessions, could be hiding in one of the abandoned industrial zones on the outskirts of Chicago, along with her people. Tom only had time to briefly explain that this underground network manipulates patients in order to use them for dubious purposes, transporting illegal drugs, fulfilling orders, and sometimes committing more serious acts under the influence of hypnotic suggestions. Dr. Avery's sessions were only part of a large-scale experiment involving a new drug that erases the memory of completed tasks. But then events moved quickly and scary. Tom disappeared from contact, and Jake, fearing that his detective friend was in trouble, went with police reinforcements to the location indicated on Tom's map. Emily, despite her husband's protests, firmly stated that she would go with him. She believed that only her memories would help her understand what was happening and understand where to look for a psychotherapist. Jake reluctantly agreed, although his heart sank with fear for his wife. After all, she was not just a witness, she was connected with this story in the most direct way. When the police cars pulled up to the abandoned warehouse complex, everything around seemed dark and lifeless. Late evening, desolate, only a couple of dim lanterns at the gate. Inside, judging by the clues Tom discovered, activity could be in full swing: illegal trafficking of prohibited substances, experiments about which there were rumors, and people who were ready to do anything for the sake of their secret organization. One of the doors was ajar, and the lock had been broken. The policeman, in full uniform, moved forward, while Jake and Emily remained behind, waiting for the signal. But fear for Tom, who did not answer calls, forced them not to sit still. They followed, trying to stay close to the group. There was a whiff of cold and damp smell inside. There were boxes, pieces of furniture, and broken bottles everywhere. It seemed that this place had been abandoned for a long time, and only here and there were traces of the recent presence of people visible: crumpled plastic cups, the remains of cardboard packaging with medical notes, and also traces of dark spots on the floor that made the heart beat faster. Blood flashed through Jake's head, but there was no time to determine what exactly it was. The police divided into two groups and began to comb the corridors. Emily suddenly felt a vague tremor of recognition stir in the depths of her consciousness. This gloomy environment seemed to echo in the flashes of her forgotten dreams or hypnotic visions. There was something painfully familiar in these corridors, as if she had been here before. Anxiety flared up, intensifying at every step. But Emily firmly moved forward. She had lived in lies and fear for too long. Now she wanted to put an end to it herself. Be careful," Jake warned quietly. "If you see something familiar or remember something, tell me." She just nodded. Scraps of paper rustled underfoot and puddles of water dripped from leaky pipes slid. A rumble was heard from afar, perhaps a door was opened somewhere, or someone moved a heavy object. The group of policemen walked further, and suddenly someone's shadow flashed through the opening on the side. "Here!" The sergeant's command call rang out, and everyone rushed to follow the movement. Jake, closing his hand with Emily, led her in the same direction. Around the bend, there was another door that looked like it led to a more equipped room. There was an office sign hanging on it, hastily screwed on, and around it looked like renovations had once been started, but not finished. Suddenly, Emily felt a tingling sensation in her temples and a short flash of pain as if a memory flashed through, and she remembered, they led me here. I was in the corridor and then a brown door. Hardly pushing away the dizziness, she grabbed Jake by the sleeve. It's here. I remember the brown door. At that moment, someone inside, behind the door, sharply slammed the bolt. The police rushed around. Someone demanded to open. A shot followed, loud and frightening in the narrow room. The bullet hit the metal frame and ricocheted sparks. The officers ducked down and two prepared to break down the door. Emily screamed and backed up against the wall, but immediately felt panic wash over her. Calm down, she repeated to herself. Don't get lost. The door wouldn't budge. Sergeant, with a cover-up gesture, gave the command to take it out with a ram, but at that moment another series of dull shots rang out. One of the bullets hit one of the officers. He swayed and fell to the floor. The others immediately returned fire, shouting angrily, "Police, drop your weapon!" "Jake," Emily squeaked, seeing how everything around her was turning into chaos. She wanted to crawl to the side, hide, but at the same time she wanted to find Tom and find out the truth. Suddenly, there was a noise behind us. It turns out that there was another passage next to the corridor. Someone grabbed Emily by the shoulder, and she turned around, managing to see a familiar face. Psychotherapist, a woman named Avery who led her sessions. The same one that later disappeared, and now, apparently, organized everything that happened here. Recognition flashed in her eyes, and she abruptly pulled Emily inside the dimly lit room. "Hey!" Jake rushed after him, but in the confusion he lost sight of them for a moment. The police and bandits exchanged fire. The lights were flashing. Emily, staggering back, escaped the grip, but found herself in a room where there was a large rectangular mirror in a frame reflecting her pale face, and a little further away could be seen a table with equipment and some medical instruments. Avery closed the door behind her and stood in front of Emily, preventing her from escaping. "So you got to me on your own," Avery said in a cold, even voice. "What a pity that everything didn't go according to plan. You were selected for this experiment precisely because of your vulnerable consciousness. You had to complete the task and not remember anything. To remove one of our enemies on the very night you ended up in Chicago. But you, apparently, subconsciously blocked the suggestion. Or you overdid it with sleeping pills, which brought all your efforts to naught." Emily stood there, breathing heavily, her heart pounding as if it was beating out of her chest. The doctor's words sounded like a stunning blow. Was she supposed to kill someone herself? Was the real goal all along to force her to become a silent perpetrator of crimes? "You're lying," Emily whispered, feeling her knees shaking. "I would never commit murder." "Of course, I would never go," Avery nodded with slight mockery. "That's exactly why our drug and hypnosis exist, so that people do things that they wouldn't consciously agree to. And your insomnia, anxiety, all this was just a door through which we entered your mind." Emily felt everything inside her shrink with horror and rage. She remembered nightmares about the motel, strange rituals, mirrors. She was hit with memories of how strange she felt before her disappearance. And now everything has finally taken shape. Dr. Avery has been hired to program such vulnerable patients, erasing their memory of completed tasks. "No," Emily let out almost a moan. "Don't you dare say that I signed up for this. Nobody asked you," Avery said with icy calm. "As you can see, the system is debugged. But now it's too late to change anything. If you get out of here alive and tell the others the whole truth about how easily we can be controlled, everything will go down the drain. I will have to remove your memory completely, or, alas, eliminate it." With these words, she took a step towards a small table with syringes and vials that stood in a metal tray. Emily instantly understood. She wants to inject me with the drug again. But suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed that in the room, in addition to large medical lamps and a table, there was a rectangular mirror hanging on the wall, the same one that Emily had already seen in her dream. It's like déjà vu. From there, her own distorted reflection looked back at her. And then she remembered the words from the mysterious note. Don't trust the mirror. Are you going to try to hypnotize me again? Emily squeezed out, trying to gain time. Of course, Avery replied, looking up at her. This is the last step. Now that you know the truth, I will have to rewrite your reality. Relax and look in the mirror. Her voice became low, soothing. Remember how we did this at the session. Remember how you go into a deep trance, how you feel relaxed. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Indeed, she remembered how easily she was susceptible to suggestion in previous sessions. The very thought of it made my head foggy. But now she was ready. She clenched her teeth, straining her entire being so as not to fall into the rut of suggestion. Resistance flared up in her, almost physical. It was as if some part of her memory, which could not be erased, was repeating in a whisper. Don't give in. Don't trust the mirror. Swallowing, Emily saw in the reflection of the face, her own frightened, but determined, and behind her Avery, peering with cold confidence in success. And then she made a sharp movement. She snatched a metal tray from the table and slammed it on the glass. Avery flinched, but didn't have time to stop her. The mirror cracked with a ringing, chilling sound, and then pieces began to fall. They clanged on the floor, and one of the large fragments flew straight into Emily's hand. What are you doing? Avery exclaimed, losing her composure for a moment. Without a mirror, Emily clutched the shard in her hand, cutting her palm but ignoring the pain. The adrenaline was burning, and she raised that glass knife like a weapon, pointing it at Avery. Emily's own eyes sparkled with determination that she had never imagined she had in herself. Don't come closer, she warned in a broken voice. It's over. I remembered how you injected me with something to make me obey, but I will no longer listen to your suggestions. Avery tried to grab a syringe from the table, but Emily immediately rushed forward. A hairpin from a broken mirror sparkled under the dim light, and the doctor pulled back, not wanting to get hurt. Out of her peripheral vision, Emily noticed movement at the entrance, and a voice was heard. Are you here? It was Jake, whose screams and sounds of breaking glass apparently led him to the desired room. Several other officers were visible next to him. Seeing that Emily was holding a fragment in her hand and an unknown woman was standing opposite, the officers aimed their weapons. Stop! Police! They commanded, not knowing which of the two posed the greater threat. Avery took advantage of the pause. She abruptly grabbed a syringe from the tray and took a step sideways, trying to hide behind a massive cabinet, clearly looking for a way out to escape. But it was not difficult for the police squad to block her path. Two officers rushed to disarm her. Another shot rang out from somewhere behind, perhaps from Avery's remaining accomplices, whom they were trying to fight off. And the next second Jake was already hugging Emily, carefully, trying not to get hurt by the fragment that she was still clutching. She was shaking all over. Her heart was almost jumping out of her chest, and there were tears in my eyes. He gently pulled the glass shard out of her hand, took it away so that she would not harm herself, and saw a red streak of scratch and cut from the scattered shards. Hush, hush, that's it, he whispered. Are you okay? She could only nod, exhaling. In the corridor and behind the doors, turmoil and screams continued. The police were finishing off the last pockets of resistance. Some of the bandits tried to escape through the back exit. Avery escaped from the officers' hands, but didn't have time to run far. They blocked her way, knocked her to the floor, and knocked out the syringe. A second later, handcuffs were already snapped onto her wrists. So, finally, the main organizer found himself in the hands of justice, unless she figures out a way to sneak out again. But looking at all this, Emily felt not so much triumph as devastation, as if some nightmare had gone on for too long, and now she wakes up in a reality where her fate is in the balance. She realized with horror that the therapist was not lying. They really planned to use Emily for murder, and only an accidental circumstance derailed this terrible mission. Jake called her again, hugging her close. It's over, she can't hurt you anymore. She just shook her head weakly. This is not the end. Their network is larger than we think. The psychotherapist said we, which means there are other people working with her. And, and where is Tom? He. But then one of the policemen appeared in the doorway, supporting Tom Crow by the arm. He was apparently wounded in the shoulder. His t-shirt was torn and soaked in blood. However, he remained on his feet, although he had turned pale. Seeing Emily and Jake, he smiled forcefully. "It's okay, don't worry." The bullet grazed slightly. I saw how they tried to run in the other direction. He almost fell over, but they supported him. The main thing is that we found evidence. There, in the office, a whole stack of papers, records of experiments. I hope the prosecutor will now put them all on the hook in full. Jake quickly ran up to him, helping him sit on a low bench that stood against the wall, and asked the officer to call an ambulance. Meanwhile, the sergeant and another policeman were leading Avery by the arms. She looked at Emily not so much with fear as with cold anger that burned with her gaze. She seemed to not believe that everything could have failed because of some little thing, sleeping pills and a misfire in hypnotic programming. "See you later, Emily," Avery hissed as she was dragged past. "No one gets out of their own shadow." Emily involuntarily trembled at these words, but at the same time felt a pang of rage. She would never allow anyone to get into her mind again. She will have to cope with the guilt of being a pawn in someone else's game, albeit unwittingly. But now it is better than living in oblivion and fear. Finally, the officers intervened, leading Avery away. It became a little quieter. Only the distant sounds of police conversations on the radio reminded that the premises were still being cleared. Jake put his arm around Emily's shoulders, seeing how pale she was. "Let's go to the car." "That's enough. I want you to be examined by doctors." Emily looked at him with wide eyes. "Yes, yes, of course. I need some air." Walking along the corridors back to freedom, all the way she secretly glanced at the remains of broken glass in the hands of the officer, who carried it as evidence. It was a reminder of the note, "Don't trust the mirror." Perhaps it was this phrase, or more precisely, the very fact that she latched on to this warning that saved her from being rehypnotized. And now that the main conspiracy has been exposed, she faces a long road to healing, to again trusting herself, her memories, and the reflection in the mirror. As they exited the building, they were met by a cool night wind. Ambulances were already standing by, paramedics were helping the wounded officers, and were about to bandage Tom. When Emily was next to him, he smiled. "I'm glad it worked out for you," he said quietly, wincing in pain. "I was afraid that hypnosis would interfere with you again." "I was afraid of the same thing," she admitted. "Thank you for not giving up and bringing the investigation to the end." One of the doctors called Emily over to examine the cut on her palm, and Jake walked alongside. He hugged his wife around the waist, feeling how she shuddered from the rolling sobs, either from pain or from fatigue, or from the realization of how terrible the truth was. But she allowed herself to be treated. At least the physical wounds were not too serious. "We'll work on the rest gradually," Jake thought. The police soon confirmed that most of the underground network did not survive in this particular place. According to the documents found by Tom, it was possible to identify other participants. Of course, a large-scale investigation was ahead, to find out how many victims had been programmed in the same way as they tried to program Emily. Some people may have been used for a long time, erasing their memory of the crimes they committed. But while the story was not yet over, a key knot had been untied. Dr. Avery, the brains of the operation, had been detained, and her expert hypnosis techniques and drugs had fallen into the hands of investigators. When the paramedic finished the bandage and walked away, Jake turned Emily towards him and looked into her tear-stained eyes. "We did it." "You did it," he said firmly, with tenderness in his voice. "And I promise you, no matter what happens next, I will not leave you alone. We will get you out of this nightmare until the end." She clung to him, sobbing, and whispered through her tears, "I was afraid that I would drown in my own head. But now I know that I can resist. And thank you. Thank you for believing in me, even when the photographs and all the evidence said that I did all this voluntarily." He only squeezed her tighter, feeling how he was finally freed from the weight of doubts that had haunted him for so many days. He felt the cold of the night on his back, and the noise of police radios, sirens, and fuss near the warehouse building was still in his ears. But at that moment, the main thing was their closeness, their common consciousness that the worst was behind them. This is how night operations ended in an abandoned industrial complex. Not all questions were removed from the agenda. Who exactly hired Avery? How many of these selected were there? And will all the victims, those whose memory was erased, be able to regain their normal lives? Emily will have to go through a long road of rehabilitation, learning to trust herself and the world again. But the main thing is that the manipulative doctor who was at the origins of this network did not escape justice. A few hours later, already in the morning, he and Jake were sitting in the hospital waiting room. The nurses probed the policeman's bruises and wounds, bandaged Tom. Emily treated the cuts and gave a calming injection for shock. The lamps flashed, the instruments rang, and Jake quietly held his wife's hand, trying to warm her trembling fingers at least a little. He turned around, looked at his reflection in the glass door of the medicine cabinet, and suddenly felt a slight chill. The memory of the note flashed through his head. Don't trust the mirror. He now knew what it meant. You cannot believe the image that they are trying to inspire, and you cannot allow the temptations of other people's suggestions to become the truth. Emily caught his gaze and smiled faintly, a little sadly, but without the previous doom. I'm not afraid of mirrors, she whispered. I'm only afraid that we haven't fully uncovered this network yet. Together we can find others, Jake replied, squeezing her hand, and stop them. If you need my help, I'm always there. She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. So, in the pre-dawn twilight of the hospital corridor, they both understood that a difficult road lay ahead of them. Testimony in court, interrogations, the need to regain their good name and peace. But now they had the most valuable weapon in their hands, the truth. And the broken mirror became a symbol of the fact that suggestion is not omnipotent if there is a spark of resistance inside a person. It was dawn when the doctors, having completed urgent matters, gave them permission to go home. Tom remained overnight under observation. He needed to recover from his wound. And the police continued to find out the names of those who fled or remained at other addresses. But for Emily and Jake, a new morning has already arrived. Fragile, full of anxiety, but with a ray of hope. They walked out onto the hospital porch, and Emily clung to her husband, feeling the first sunlight touch her face. It seemed as if she had never before so keenly appreciated the very opportunity to be yourself without fear, without someone else's voice in your head. A warm breeze touched her hair. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Let's go home, Jake said. We'll rest there and talk about everything. Okay, she nodded, and thank you. He leaned down and lightly touched her forehead with his lips. Somewhere in the distance, the morning noise of the city had already begun. Cars were hurrying about their business. People were waking up and going to work. And for the two of them, this dawn was a new beginning. They had to work together to deal with all the scars both on their bodies and in their memories. But now that the main puppeteer has lost his power, they have a real opportunity to return life to normal. Or more precisely, to rebuild it without secret sessions, without hypnosis, and without the terrifying tasks that they only imagined. At that moment, Emily smiled, squeezed Jake's hand, and said, I won't let anyone break me from the inside anymore. Now I know this for sure. He answered her with the same warm smile. And I know too. Let's go, Em. They headed to the car, feeling that today was the first day of their new life, where they themselves control their own destiny. And although there could still be many trials ahead, they had already won the most important battle. They maintained faith in each other and destroyed the very mirror of lies with which they wanted to replace reality. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.